So I thought I'd start off this year with a bang. And as the missus was not being too compliant, I had to turn to Star Wars. The thing I had before a missus. Which leads me neatly to this T-47 Snowspeeder. I wanted to use something from the old movies as a basis, as I believe Star Wars did not improve with time. This is something the Star Wars franchise has in common with the Imperial Guard, who were also much better before the mid-2000s. I mean, don't get me wrong, the new plastic Krieg are all very well and good, but the member of staff who decided that the Cadians were the faction that everybody wanted to see more of should really be fired. I wanted the model to retain as much of the Star Wars aesthetic as possible, so for the most part I built it as the instructions intended. In my mind's eye, I already had an idea as to how I would make it mesh into the Warhammer universe. You see, the Tau allow other species in their ranks, such as the Gue'vesa human auxiliaries. These auxiliaries are often made up of rebels from the Imperial Guard, giving that rebellious human factor that the Tau quite obviously lack. With the parts now clipped out of the sprue, it was the normal cleanup work of removing mould lines and sprue gates. I highly encourage you to do this yourself, particularly when using older or cheaper kits such as this one. There's always a possibility you'll miss a few anyway, as I did with this particular build, but it's still worth a try. As you can see, I'm currently assembling the cockpit area. Not an especially complex affair, 3 parts pressed in. With this now assembled, all I had to do was press it into the top half of the Snowspeeder body. This was the point that I expected a satisfying click, however it was not forthcoming. Honestly, I should have expected this disappointment. The model evidently knew it was being made for the Tau. As you may have gleaned from my brief look at the instructions, it was time to assemble the rear end, requiring a similar amount of snipping and cutting as demonstrated previously in the video. All I had to do then was shove it nice and hard into its bottom, which required a surprising amount of force. Everything was then held together by the underside, as the instructions indicated. These little pilot fellas that came with the kit were dramatically out of scale, so now I thought it would be a good time to test fit the Imperial Guard bits, all of which came from older kits that I just had knocking around. These parts can be found in the old Imperial Guard infantry sets, and the vehicle accessory upgrade sprue. As a concept, I thought it looked pretty good, but I definitely needed to make some room for the legs. So in that vein, I cut out the central pillar on both sides, as it was apparent to me that they wouldn't fit otherwise. What was less apparent though was just how much they wouldn't fit. I cut along this fold in the uniform on both pairs of legs so that I could retain that detail if I needed it in future. So after the 2 legs were separated and the heels were removed, in addition to some groinal sanding, the pilot's legs were eventually made to fit. Unfortunately for the co-pilot, he fared less well. However, I wish him all the best in his career in the Paralympics and hope he's not too argumentative on Valentine's Day. With the legs now in place, I added the torsos with a generous amount of green stuff, which I cleaned up a little later. I snipped off the original blasters as I wanted them to be replaced with las guns. Now that the blasters were removed, I could progress with the final building stages of the original donor kit, or at least the parts of it I wanted to use anyway. Mercifully, this was quite the uncomplicated affair, and I had it done reasonably quickly. The only thing I will say is the fit was a little bit tight at times, but what more can you expect from a kit that costs £7 retail? Normally if I got something tight for £7, I wouldn't complain. I went through my bits box and picked out 2 matching las cannons, doing the usual amount of assembly and prep while also measuring them up against the cut-off blasters, and filing off a bit at the back so it can sit flush with the original gun's mounting point, doing similar modifications to the opposing side. I then moved on to finishing up the pilot and co-pilot, starting with removing the shoulder pad of the pilot's left arm. I removed the shoulder pads from both sides and in the process injured my thumb. I highly recommend you investing in a thimble if this is an issue that you come across regularly. With the arms now done, I needed something so that the pilot could control the vehicle. The original control surfaces were far too small, as they were not in scale, so I decided to do handlebars not unlike those on a quad bike, cutting a few grooves with my craft knife to give the handle a texture, and using this handle from the guard vehicle upgrade sprue as the piece that mounts it to the vehicle. As you may have noticed, I was just attaching the heads there, which didn't require a lot of modification, just the removal of the Aquila from the helmets. Something else you may have noticed in that footage is my great folly. this Gatling gun. I later decided it was way too long, something I'm not often burdened with personally. Honestly, I'm unsure as to why I chose the minigun. I think I was just hyped that I drilled the barrels so well. The next details I wanted to add were pipes, hoses and wires made from green stuff and guitar strings respectively. With regards to the green stuff, I mixed the two parts together, popped it in my cable roller, and gave it a liberal amount of water across all contacting surfaces, green stuff included. There is such a thing as too much water, but too little is an absolute nightmare, and will make quite the mess. Try to aim for a glistening surface, but not completely wet. Like all the ladies listening right now. If everything goes according to plan, you'll have a pretty serviceable cable right there. I cut off the rounded ends of the new cable, so that I could fit it neatly into the Snowspeeder's body. Unfortunately, due to video corruption, I'm going to have to demonstrate on a turret. For this, dear viewer, I can only apologise. At the back of the Speeder, the green stuff cables were curved. To make this more manageable, I allowed the green stuff to cure for an hour and a half, before adjusting it with moistened fingers. I got it almost the whole way around the rear panel before allowing it to dry, and making the rest of the distance up by securing it with superglue. This was important so as to not mar the finish. And now onto the aforementioned material, guitar string. Guitar strings are thin, malleable, and have a nice texture, so I use them quite liberally in my builds. In the days of green stuff sculpting, I'm pretty sure that Games Workshop use them in some of their bionics, you know. Being as flexible as it is, you can use pretty much whatever tool you deem appropriate for bending the wire. In my case, hands and pliers. My only recommendation is you use clippers you aren't overly fond of for cutting the wire, as it will quickly blunt them. After all that adjusting, the guitar strings can be put into place with your fingers and tweezers, and then made more permanent with a liberal application of superglue. In this case, it was a little too liberal, however I was in a rush, and I've got to be honest, the smell of the fumes is quite, evocative. Seriously though, don't sniff superglue. The hallucinations are quite troubling. What you want to try and do is get a small, thin thing, preferably a plastic toothpick, but whatever you've got to hand really, and gradually apply superglue to the underside of the string. The less you can use to secure it the better, as it will reduce on the texture and the amount of frosting created by the superglue drying. If you apply these techniques in a similar way to your own model, you'll end up with something a little like this. As I was planning to proxy it as the Tau Piranha scout ship, I had to add a drone, astromech droid, to the front. And seeing as it came with the kit and I had nothing to base it with, I used the stand that the model was designed to be built on, and finally replaced that ridiculous rear gun. Now folks, not unlike Cadia, I got a split. Enjoy the reveal.